A ordinary waitress becomes the target of silent, deadly men the moment she walks into her own shift. And the only person standing between her and disappearing forever is a tattooed stranger who leans across the table and whispers, "Pretend you're my wife, right now. Don't ask why." What Marco Montana doesn't tell her is that he already knows her name, already knows her mother, already knows the secret that was buried 18 years ago in a deal made between two men. One who became a monster, and one who died trying to stop him. By the third chapter, nothing about her identity, her past, or the reason she's being hunted will be what it appears. The revelations hit like detonations, each one louder than the last. This is a story about a woman who thought she had nothing, discovering she was always the most dangerous thing in the room. If this kind of story hits different for you, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I have something even more intense lined up, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into it. The diner had been quiet for exactly 4 minutes when the door opened and everything changed. Elena Vasquez noticed the man the way you notice an incoming storm, not by the noise it makes, but by the absolute silence that precedes it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that seemed tailored around the specific geometry of controlled violence. Platinum blonde hair slicked back with surgical precision, ice blue eyes that swept the room once and cataloged everything worth knowing in under 3 seconds. A tattoo above his left eyebrow, another climbing his neck. Diamond rings catching the fluorescent light as his hand rested flat on the host stand. Elena looked away fast. She'd worked the morning shift at Del Vecchio's for 3 years. She'd learned early which customers you held eye contact with and which ones you didn't. This man belonged firmly in the second category. He chose her section anyway. She approached with her notepad and her trained professional smile. "Good morning. Can I get you something to drink?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved past her toward the window, tracking something outside with the patience of a man who had spent his entire life monitoring threats. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and Elena felt something cold move through her chest. Not exactly fear, recognition. Like those ice blue eyes had been searching specifically for her face and had just confirmed what they were looking for. "Coffee," he said. Low voice, unhurried, the kind of voice that never needed to be raised because the room always quieted for it. Elena brought the coffee. She was halfway back to the counter when she felt the shift. That specific atmospheric pressure a room full of people produces when something is wrong. She turned. 2 men had entered the diner, gray suits, shoulders too wide for casual dress. One positioned near the door, the other moving between the tables on a path that was not random, not wandering. He was cutting a straight line toward Elena's section, toward her. Her feet stopped. "Sit down." The voice was quiet, close. The man in the black suit had appeared at her side without a sound, without any warning. His hand went to the small of her back, not grabbing, just present, guiding. "Sit across from me, right now, and when you do, hold my hand and look at me like you've known me your whole life." Elena's mind went white. "They're watching you," he said, already steering her toward the booth. "Not me. You. And if you don't sit down in the next 4 seconds, the man in the gray suit is going to reach inside his jacket and this morning is going to end very badly for everyone in this building." She sat. He slid across from her with an unhurried, almost bored posture and extended his hand across the table, covering hers. His rings were cold. His palm was warm. "My name is Marco," he said, his eyes holding hers with absolute steadiness. "And for 3 minutes, you are my wife. Married 6 years. Breakfast before I drop you at your mother's house. You're irritated with me about something small and domestic. Can you do that?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who are those men?" "People who have been looking for you for a very long time." His thumb passed once across her knuckles, almost gentle. "I'll explain everything. But first you give me 3 minutes of the most convincing performance of your life." The man in the gray suit had stopped 2 tables behind her. Elena could feel the weight of his stare like physical pressure. She exhaled slowly, rolled her eyes with the specific exhaustion of a woman who had explained the same thing 17 times, and said, loud enough, "Marco, I already told you I don't want to go to my mother's house today. We always do what you want." Marco's expression shifted, something like surprised approval crossing his features before he locked it back down. "We're going," he said simply. "This isn't a discussion." The man in the gray suit stood still for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the door. Marco did not relax, not by a single degree. "Good," he said quietly. "Now listen very carefully, because I'm going to say this once. There's a black SUV in the alley behind this building. You're going to walk to the bathroom, climb out the window and get into that vehicle. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." Elena stared at him. "I'm not going anywhere with a stranger." "My name is Marco Montana." His eyes didn't blink. "And 18 years ago, I made a promise to a woman named Rosa Vasquez on the night she asked me to make sure her daughter stayed alive." The name hit Elena like a wall. Rosa Vasquez. Her mother. Her mother who had died 8 years ago in what the police had classified as a car accident. Her mother, whose name this man had just pronounced with the specific weight of someone carrying it as a debt. "How do you know my mother's name?" Marco's jaw tightened. "Because I was there the night she made the deal that put this target on your back." He glanced toward the door. The man in the gray suit was back, on his phone now, reading something off the screen with an expression that snapped shut. "They've confirmed who you are. We have approximately 90 seconds. "What deal?" Elena's voice cracked. "What target? What are you talking about?" "The kind of answer that is going to change everything you believe about your own life." Marco stood, dropping $300 on the table without counting. "And I will give you every single one of them, but you need to move right now." The SUV smelled like leather, cold air, and something faintly chemical that Elena chose not to identify. She locked the doors as soon as she got in, then sat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, watching the diner's rear entrance through the tinted windows while her heart worked at a pace she was fairly certain wasn't sustainable. Marco came out the back 2 minutes later. He moved without hurrying, which somehow made him more dangerous, not less. A man who understood that running is an invitation to be chased. He slid into the driver's seat with the same controlled economy he brought to everything, pulled out of the alley at a speed that was fast without being reckless, and said nothing. Elena said nothing either, for exactly 45 seconds. Then, "Start talking." Marco kept his eyes on the mirrors. "Your mother came to me 18 years ago. You were 7 years old. She walked into a meeting she had no business knowing about and put a name on the table, a name that was worth enough to certain people that they agreed to leave her alone. Leave you alone. In exchange for silence." "What name?" "Raphael Kane." The words landed in Elena's chest like stones dropped into still water. She knew that name. All of Baltimore knew that name. Raphael Kane had been the most feared figure in organized crime in the city for 2 decades before his arrest 6 years ago, currently serving 37 years in federal prison. "My mother had nothing to do with Raphael Kane," Elena said. "She was a seamstress. She worked 14-hour days." "She was a seamstress," Marco agreed. "Who 18 years ago witnessed the murder of a federal informant in the Clement Street parking structure. She saw the man who pulled the trigger, saw his face clearly enough to identify him." Elena's breathing went shallow. "And that man was Kane's chief enforcer, a man named Dodd Pryor." Marco changed lanes smoothly. "Your mother walked out of that parking structure and made a calculation that most people couldn't make under that kind of pressure. She went directly to Kane. told him what she had seen, said she had no interest in going to the police, that she had a 7-year-old daughter and no desire to die for something she witnessed by accident. She offered him a guaranteed silence in exchange for protection. And he agreed. He agreed. Because she was smart enough to offer him something he wanted more than her silence. Marco's voice was flat. She told him she recognized Pryor, and that 2 days earlier she had overheard Pryor on a phone call that Kane would find very interesting. What information? That Pryor was already talking to the FBI, for months. He was building a case against Kane from the inside. Marco looked at her. Your mother handed Kane the name of his own traitor. In exchange for your lives, Pryor disappeared 3 days later. The silence in the SUV was enormous. Elena thought about her mother, about the specific vigilance Rosa Vasquez had carried like a second skin, the way she checked locks, cataloged strangers, had taught Elena to memorize 2 different bus routes home from school, and never explained why. She never told me. She never should have. Marco pulled into a parking garage, wound up 4 levels, stopped in a far corner away from the cameras. The arrangement held for 10 years. Kane kept his word. Your mother kept hers. Then Kane was arrested, and everything his organization had built, every deal, every arrangement, every silent agreement, went into dispute as his lieutenants fought for position. And someone decided the deal no longer applied. Someone decided that a woman who knew the full story of how Dodd Pryor disappeared was a risk that needed to be eliminated. Marco's voice was even, clinical. Even so, it felt like a physical blow. Your mother's car accident was not an accident. Elena had known. Some part of her had always known. The police report had been too clean, cleared too quickly for an accident that should have raised more questions. She had told herself she was being paranoid. That grief made you see patterns where there were none. Who? Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Who made that decision? A man named Victor Cross, Kane's successor, the one who has been consolidating the organization since Kane went to prison. Marco's jaw tightened. And the reason those men were in your diner this morning is that Cross recently learned something. Something your mother left behind before she died. What did she leave? Marco looked at her directly for the first time since they had stopped. His ice blue eyes carried something she couldn't name. Not pity. Something older and more complicated than pity. A recording, he said. Your mother recorded everything. Every conversation she had with Kane's people over 10 years. Every meeting. Every name. She built a file that could dismantle Cross's entire operation and put him in a cell next to Kane. Elena stared at him. And she hid it. She hid it somewhere only you could find. His voice was careful now. She left instructions, coded into something she gave you before she died. Something you almost certainly still have and never understood the meaning of. Elena's mind went immediately, involuntarily, to the only thing her mother had pressed into her hands at the hospital. 3 days before she died. A small, worn leather journal, filled with what appeared to be recipes. Her mother's handwriting. Elena had kept it because she couldn't throw it away, had never opened it more than twice because it hurt too much. What did she give you, Elena? Marco asked quietly. Elena's blood went cold. Down below, somewhere in the parking structure beneath them, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car door closing. Then another. Marco heard it too. His hand was already moving inside his jacket. They found us faster than they should have, he said, his voice dropping to something absolutely controlled. Which means someone knew where I was going before I knew. He looked at her. Which means we have a problem inside my own house. They left the car behind and went up, through a maintenance stairwell that Marco seemed to know from memory. 3 more levels to the top of the parking structure, where the city spread below them in the flat midday light. Marco moved without hesitating, without the slightest waste of motion that comes from improvising. He had contingencies. He simply hadn't expected to need them this soon. Elena followed because the alternative was going down toward whatever had just parked below them with coordinated precision, and that was not a choice she was prepared to make. On the roof, Marco made a single call. No greeting, no name. Pell Street Garage. Roof level. Now. He ended it and pocketed the phone. Who was that? Elena asked. The one person in my organization I am certain is not responsible for this. How can you be certain? Because she's been out of the country for 6 days and landed 40 minutes ago. He swept the roof perimeter. And because she's the one who warned me about you in the first place. Elena absorbed that. Someone inside your organization warned you that I was in danger. Someone inside my organization has been feeding information in 2 directions for a long time. Marco's voice was quiet, but there was something beneath it, a controlled fury that was more frightening for being so contained. I built something I believed was airtight. I was wrong, and a woman named Rosa Vasquez paid for that mistake. The words landed on Elena like a hand pressed flat against a wound. He wasn't distancing himself from it. He wasn't explaining it away. He was holding it directly. You knew my mother personally, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Marco was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but stripped of tactical precision. She came to me a second time 3 years after her arrangement with Kane. She had heard that I was building an operation that ran contrary to Kane's, that I had my own code about certain categories of business I refused to touch. He paused. She had heard I could be trusted with a specific kind of secret. What kind? She knew that Kane's people were starting to watch her again. She was afraid the deal was unraveling. She came to me and asked me to do something. He turned to look at Elena directly. She asked me to look after her daughter. Said that if anything happened to her, she wanted someone who understood the terrain to make sure you didn't become a target. She gave me your name, your address, your photograph. Said you knew nothing and needed to stay that way. Elena felt something shift in her chest, something large and structural, like a load-bearing wall deciding to move. You've been watching me. For 8 years. His voice was even. Starting 6 months before your mother died. You knew she was going to be killed? I suspected the threat was escalating. I wasn't fast enough. His jaw tightened. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Elena turned, facing the city from up high. 8 years. This man, this stranger with his tattoos and his diamonds and his absolute stillness, had existed somewhere in the background of her entire adult life, without her knowing. She thought about the moments she had felt watched. That specific sensation, almost paranoia, that the air around her carried weight. She had attributed it to anxiety, to the long tale of grief. The journal, she said quietly. My mother's journal. You know what it contains. I know what she told me it would contain. I've never seen it. He held her gaze steadily. She said it was instructions, a map, essentially, coded in a way only you would understand. The things she chose as reference points, recipes you cooked together, places you used to go, language that was private between the two of you. She designed it to look meaningless to anyone else. And where does it lead? To a drive, physical storage, everything she recorded across 10 years of interactions with Kane's organization, names, transactions, orders, including the order to kill Dodd Pryor. Including, she told me, the conversation in which Victor Cross was first identified as the man Kane intended to succeed him. Marco let that settle. That drive doesn't just expose Cross. It exposes half the infrastructure of this city. Police officers, judges, port authorities. It is the kind of evidence that brings down entire systems. Elena turned to face him, and Cross knows the drive exists. Cross recently learned that it exists. We believe the source of that information." Marco stopped. His eyes moved past Elena's shoulder with a quickness that telegraphed something changing fast. A door on the far end of the roof opened. Elena's body stiffened, but the figure that emerged was a woman, small, compact, dark hair, wearing a blazer that didn't do a particularly good job of hiding the shoulder holster beneath it. She swept the rooftop with quick professional eyes and walked toward them with the stride of someone who doesn't waste steps. "Mara," Marco said, "we have a leak. Someone inside tracked my movement to the garage." The woman named Mara looked at Elena for exactly 1 second, assessing, filing, done. Then looked back at Marco with an expression that carried something careful. "That's the part you need to hear," she said. "I didn't come from the airport, Marco. I've been in the city since yesterday." She paused. "Because I found something that couldn't wait. The leak inside your organization." She stopped again, looked at Elena, back at Marco with something in her eyes that approached a kind of dread. "It isn't someone who wants Cross to win. It's someone who has been protecting the girl the same way you have." "Explain that," Marco said, his voice dropping almost to nothing. "The person feeding information from inside your house is not working for Cross." Mara's voice was steady and devastating. "They're working for the same man who sent Rosa Vasquez to you in the first place." Elena's breath stopped. "There's a second recording," Mara said. "Not the one in the journal. A recording that Rosa Vasquez made in the year before she died. One that she gave to a man she trusted completely. A man who has been using it as leverage ever since." She looked at Elena. Her voice came out quiet. Final. "A man whose name your mother made sure you would never hear, because knowing that name was the most dangerous thing she could imagine for you." The rooftop fell into a silence so complete that Elena could hear the noise of the city rising 6 floors below, like a distant, indifferent ocean. She looked at Marco Montana, this man who had shadowed her life for 8 years, who carried her mother's name like a debt, who had placed himself between her and a threat she hadn't known existed. And she watched his face do something it had not done once during the entire morning. For just a moment, behind the ice-blue eyes and the absolute composure and the controlled danger he wore like a second skin, she watched Marco Montana look afraid. The name came out of Mara's mouth like something she had been holding back for a long time. Thomas Reel. Elena didn't recognize it. She looked at Marco. His expression told her that he did, and that the recognition cost him something immediate and visible. "Reel was the attorney who structured your mother's original arrangement with Kane's organization," Marco said. His voice had gone very quiet. 18 years ago, he was the intermediary. The man who translated between 2 worlds that don't share a language. My mother had an attorney in all of this. Elena's voice was flat. Someone she paid to negotiate with a crime organization. Someone already embedded in that world long before Rosa came along, Mara said, pulling a phone from her jacket. She turned the screen toward them. A photograph. A man in his late 60s, silver-haired, standing outside a federal courthouse with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been on the wrong side of its doors. Thomas Reel has spent 20 years operating as a legitimate attorney. Corporate law, city contracts, clean record, excellent reputation. He is also the reason that every time Cross got close to tracing your mother, the trail went cold. He was protecting her, Elena said. He was protecting the recording she gave him, Mara corrected. There's a difference. Rosa gave Reel a second recording as insurance, evidence of his own involvement in the Kane arrangement. As long as he kept her safe, she kept quiet about his role. The moment she died, the leverage flipped. He's been using it to keep himself untouchable, Marco said. Something cold moved through his expression, while Cross consolidated. While the people who killed your mother went unpunished, Reel used her evidence as a personal shield. Elena stood very still. The morning had started with 2 strangers in gray suits and had arrived here. At a dead woman's lawyer, at insurance converted to leverage, at a second recording that existed because her mother had trusted no one completely. Not even the man she hired to protect her. Smart, she thought. Even at the end, her mother had been thinking 3 steps ahead. "Where is Real now?" she asked. Mara's expression shifted into something careful. "That is the problem. He reached out to Cross 48 hours ago. We intercepted the communication." She paused. "He offered to deliver you in exchange for full immunity and the destruction of any evidence linking him to Kane." The air on the rooftop felt thinner. "He told Cross where to find me," Elena said. "Level, precise. Before you even knew I was in danger." "Yes. Which means the men in the diner were Real's doing," Marco said. "Not Cross acting on his own intelligence. Real handed you over." Elena looked at the city below. 8 years her mother had built walls to keep this from reaching her. And in the end, it had been the man her mother trusted most who had opened the door. They found Real at his office on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like old money and recent renovations. Marco had confirmed through a contact that the attorney had not yet left the city, which meant he was still operating under the assumption that his arrangement with Cross was proceeding on schedule. He didn't know they were coming. The receptionist barely reached for her phone before Marco was past her. Elena followed, something cold and clarifying moving through her that she recognized as her mother's specific brand of composure under pressure. Real looked up from his desk, and his face ran through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Recognition, calculation, fear. "Miss Vasquez," he said, professionally warm. "I've been hoping to speak with you." "I know what you did," Elena said. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. "I know about the second recording. I know you gave Cross the location of the diner." Real's eyes moved to Marco. "Mr. Montana, I see you've been filling her head with—" "The journal," Marco said. "Elena has it. We've spent the last 3 hours confirming everything her mother documented inside it." He was lying. They hadn't opened the journal yet. Elena understood this instantly and said nothing. Real's composure developed a visible fracture. "That journal is protected material, attorney-client privilege. Your client is dead," Elena said, "and the man you sold her to killed her." The room went very quiet. Real set down his pen with the careful precision of a man buying himself 4 seconds to reconstruct a position. "What do you want?" "The second recording," Marco said. "Everything Rosa gave you. Every copy, every backup, every version. And your full cooperation with a federal prosecution of Victor Cross." "And if I decline?" Real's voice had recovered its smooth, professional register. His hand moved casually toward his desk drawer. "Then we walk out of here," Elena said, "and Victor Cross receives an anonymous message explaining that you've been holding recordings that expose his entire operation for 18 years. She paused. "And that you've spent the last 6 hours meeting with Marco Montana." Real's hand stopped. The color left his face in a way that was almost clinical to observe. Elena watched it happen and felt only the flat certainty of someone who had already moved past surprise into something colder and more useful. Her mother had taught her this too, she realized. Not in words. In years of watching Rosa Vasquez hold impossible positions with perfect stillness. "You're exactly like her," Real said quietly. Something in his voice might have been genuine. It didn't move her. "The recording," Elena said. "Now." Real opened his desk drawer slowly, deliberately, and placed a small drive on the surface between them. His hand was trembling. Elena picked it up without breaking eye contact and held it the way her mother had once pressed a worn leather journal into her hands, like something that had cost everything and was finally, after far too long, in the right place. The federal prosecutor's name was Diane Marsh, and she met them in a parking structure on the east side of the city at 9 p.m, with 2 marshals and an expression that had long since stopped being surprised by anything. She examined the drives, both of them. Rosa's original recordings from the journal's coordinates and Real's copy, with the efficiency of someone who understood exactly what she was holding. "This is enough," she said simply. "More than enough." She looked at Elena. "Your mother was meticulous." "She had to be," Elena said. Marsh nodded, already on her phone, already setting the machinery in motion. Cross would be arrested before sunrise. Real had agreed to full cooperation before they left his office. His hands still trembling as he signed the immunity agreement Marsh's office transmitted digitally within the hour. 47 names on the recordings. 47 threads that, once pulled, would unravel the most entrenched criminal infrastructure the city had built in 30 years. Marco stood slightly apart during all of it, watching the perimeter out of instinct or habit, and Elena watched him watching and understood for the first time what 8 years of silent guardianship actually looked like from the outside. Like a man who had given something away a long time ago and never asked for it back. When Marsh's team pulled away, Marco and Elena stood alone in the parking structure. The silence between them had changed texture. No longer tactical, no longer loaded with immediate threat. Just two people on the other side of something enormous. "What do you do now?" Elena asked. Marco turned to look at her. "Same thing I've done for 8 years. Make sure you're safe." "I'm safe," she said. "It's done." "It's done," he agreed. He didn't look entirely sure what to do with that. Elena had spent the drive over thinking about the journal, about the hours still ahead of her, sitting with her mother's handwriting, following a map Rosa Vasquez had built from the private language of their shared life. Recipes, places, words that belonged only to them. She had been dreading it. She understood now that she had been wrong to. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer me honestly." Marco waited. "The night my mother came to you the second time, when she gave you my photograph and asked you to watch over me." She held his gaze. "What did you tell her?" Marco was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that isn't absence, but wait. "I told her yes," he said. "Obviously." "That's not what I'm asking." Elena didn't look away. "I'm asking what you told her when she asked you why. Why a man like you would take on something like that. No payment. No strategic advantage. Nothing in it for your organization." His jaw tightened fractionally. "She didn't ask me that." "She told me you would say that," Elena said. Marco went very still. Elena reached into her jacket pocket and produced a single folded page. Not from the journal, but tucked inside its back cover, separate from the coded entries. She had found it in the parking structure bathroom while Mara ran perimeter. Read it once. Then again. She held it out to him now. Marco took it. Read it. And for the second time that day, Elena watched something move behind his eyes that he hadn't allowed out in a very long time. The note was in Rosa's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before she died. It said, "Marco, if Elena ever finds this, it means you kept your promise. It means she's alive. I need her to know one thing that I was never brave enough to say out loud. You came to the diner the first time not because of Kane, not because of Pryor. You came because you recognized my daughter's face in a photograph that crossed your desk 18 years ago. And you recognized it because you had seen it before. Tell her. She deserves to know where she actually comes from. Tell her who her father was before he became what he became. Tell her that the man she has been unknowingly trusting to keep her alive is the same man who has been running from that truth since before she was born. Tell her I forgave him, and tell her I hope she can too." The parking structure was absolutely silent. Elena watched Marco fold the note along its original crease, slowly, with the hands of someone performing an action they needed to do carefully, or not at all. When he looked up, his ice blue eyes carried something that had no tactical name. "She knew," he said. His voice was barely sound. "She knew I knew who you were, and she never said a word to me about it." "She was protecting me," Elena said, "right up to the end, even from you." A long silence. Then, quietly, I was 19 years old. I was already inside something I didn't know how to leave. When I found out about you, I told your mother to disappear, to raise you far from everything I was. His voice didn't break. It simply became very honest. It was the only clean thing I ever did. Elena stood in the fluorescent light of a parking structure at 9 p.m, holding 18 years of her own history in both hands, looking at a man who wore diamonds and carried violence like a second language, and had spent 8 years keeping a promise to a woman he had wronged and could never repay. She thought about her mother pressing that journal into her hands, about Rosa's eyes in those final days, not afraid, she realized now. Certain. Her mother had known exactly what Elena would find, had trusted her to find it, had built the whole map knowing her daughter was strong enough to follow it all the way to the end. I'm not ready to call you anything, Elena said finally. Her voice was steady. I'm not asking you to, Marco said. I know. She nodded once, turned toward the exit, then stopped. You should know that I'm going to use what my mother built, she said. The recordings, the prosecution, all of it. I'm going to finish what she started. I know that too. His voice held something that might, from a certain angle, have been pride. You going to try and stop me? No. He said it without hesitation. I'm going to make sure nothing else ever gets in your way. Elena walked out into the night air. Above Baltimore, the sky was clear for the first time all day, wide and cold and full of the particular silence that only follows a storm once it has fully passed. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. For the first time in her life, she understood exactly who she was, where she came from, and what she was built to do. And for the first time in his life, Marco Montana stood still and let someone walk away from him. Not because he was letting her go, but because he finally understood that keeping a promise sometimes means knowing when to stop running alongside someone and simply trust that you raised them right.